Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of This Is Actually Pretty Cool, the web series where I am researching and cooking my way through the 1998 cookbook / memoir, In the Kitchen with Elinor Donahue. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about page 25 of the book, which is actually pretty short, and I'm also going to be pulling in some information from the interview Elinor Donahue did with the Archive of American Television. And then after that, I'm going to move on to today's recipe. I'm actually going to go ahead and start with the information from the Archive of American Television interview. In that, we find out that Elinor Donahue's father, Thomas, worked for the Tacoma Tribune, which is a newspaper. It's now called the News Tribune. Its origins date back to 1883, and it's currently the second largest daily newspaper in Washington State. So the interviewer, Jennifer Howard, asks Miss Donahue some questions about her childhood. And one of the questions she asks is, what were your hobbies, besides singing and dancing? What were other hobbies that you enjoyed as a child? And Miss Donahue basically tells us the singing and dancing did take up a lot of my time. But also another hobby I loved was playing pretend. And firstly, I think I speak for all former children when I say, same. That was also a big hobby for me. And I can also see a hobby like that being very conducive to being a child actor, because ultimately, what is acting if it's not playing pretend or playing make-believe? And so I can absolutely see that, if you're a child who loves doing this and your parent comes to you and says, hey, this thing you really love doing, what if you could do it all the time and get paid for it? If I was a kid being presented with that, I would have been like, say less. Let's go. Where do I sign? Let's get her done, basically. So anyway, on page 25 of the book, we learned that the Donahues lived near Puget Sound, and that Mr. Donahue would compete in this event called the Salmon Derby, and it was an annual event. So I am just going to go ahead and say a few things, around that. Firstly, it's something that I learned just for this episode because I love learning new things, as I've said before. A sound is a smaller body of water. It's usually connected to a sea or to an ocean. Puget Sound is part of the Salish Sea, and that in turn is part of the Pacific Ocean. So basically, we've got the big Pacific Ocean, and then part of that is the Salish Sea, and then part of the Salish Sea is the Puget Sound. Now, the Puget Sound extends approximately 100 miles. It has an average depth of 450 feet, and at its deepest, it is 930 feet. The name Puget Sound was given to it in 1792 by George Vancouver, and that was in honor of Peter Puget. That was a lieutenant who accompanied him on the Vancouver expedition. Now, Native Americans and environmental groups refer to the sound as Wulge. That's spelled W-H-U-L-G-E, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. But that is the anglicized version of an indigenous word meaning sea, saltwater, ocean, or sound. Now, something about me is that I am fascinated by cryptids. And by cryptids, I mean creatures like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster. And because of that fascination, I had to see if Puget Sound has a cryptid. And it does. Well, it sort of does, which is something you can say for every cryptid, really. The legend is that there is this creature called the king octopus that supposedly lives in the Tacoma Narrows, which is a strait of Puget Sound. Now, this creature is supposed to be 600 pounds, and it has these 8 giant tentacles. Now, no evidence of this creature has ever been found, but it is most likely based on the giant Pacific octopus. Now, that is a very real, very documented creature, and it is actually the largest species of octopi in the world, and that also does live in the Tacoma Narrows. So basically, you have this cryptid, the supposed cryptid, and you have, probably what is the reality, which is this giant Pacific octopus. Now, the typical size of an adult giant Pacific octopus is between 33 to 50 pounds, which, so it's a little less than 600 pounds. Still not something I would want to run into, especially, you know, underwater when you're already kind of discombobulated. So yeah, I just thought that was actually pretty cool. I did try to see if the same salmon derby that Thomas Donahue would have competed in the late 1930s still exists in the year of our Lord 2024. It does look like there are a few fishing derbies in the Pacific Northwest, but none of those have been around for, you know, the 80 or 90 years that you could say, oh, okay, you know what, this is a good contender for the one he would have fished in. And the Salmon Derby is brought up because Elinor Donahue basically says like, oh, hey, you know, my dad would compete in this with some friends. They never won, but because it's a fishing event, we would get a lot of salmon. She says that to this day, it's her favorite fish and she likes to broil it simply. I'm also a fan of that method. That's the way I've done it at home, and the way that I've had it prepared at restaurants. That's not the recipe we get. So today's recipe is called Salmon in Papillote. That just means salmon in parchment paper. And if you're super impressed with my pronunciation, don't be, because I totally Googled how to say it. And if you're disgusted by my pronunciation, don't be, because I totally Googled how to say it. In either case, let's just hope I'm better at cooking this than I am at speaking French. And so here we go. All right, so again, our recipe today is salmon in papillote, just salmon in parchment paper. And I do want to go ahead and say two things about this recipe. One, Elinor Donahue lets us know that it is a specialty from the kitchen of Isabel Lewis, except she says that in French, and I have exhausted my knowledge of French pronunciation, which, if you recall, came from Google anyway. So I don't know who Isabel Lewis is. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure if she appears later on in this book, but Elinor Donahue felt it appropriate to, you know, give credit for the recipe, and I do want to respect that. So thank you, Isabel Lewis, for this recipe. The second thing I want to say is that this recipe has 14 ingredients, and out of those 14 ingredients, 3 of them have measurements listed. So this kind of seems like a feel your way through it kind of recipe. So we will definitely see how that goes. Let's go ahead and talk ingredients. So ingredients are 4 to 6 salmon sandwiches. So each one is half a pound to a third of a pound. Now I actually went ahead and just did 4. And a funny story, so I went to Ingles yesterday to get all the ingredients, and I went to the fish counter at Ingles, right, the seafood counter, and he was getting the salmon for me, and so to the left was a sockeye salmon that was $13.98 a pound, and to the right of that was like the farmed salmon, right, like the fish farm salmon, which is what we have here. And I just said, like, hey, I just need 4 half-pound portions of salmon, you know, so to equal 2 pounds of salmon, right? And because they don't have on their side of the counter, they don't have signs showing them like, oh, hey, this is what it is. The only signs are the ones that we, the customers, see. So he went to reach, I mean, he was like pulling some of the wild sockeye salmon, and I was like, no, it can totally be like the fish farm salmon. Like, I mean, yes, Elinor Donahue is from the Pacific Northwest. I know that's kind of where the sockeye salmon are in Alaska and everything like that, but I am not that committed to the bit. I can justify $20 of salmon. I can't justify like $27 worth of salmon. So I just thought that was really funny. Now, in the recipe, she says, like, oh, if you have a cooperative seafood dealer, you can ask them to slash the thick part of the fillet the long way so you have a salmon sandwich. Now, asking for extra things does violate my compulsive need to never be an imposition to anyone ever, and that's just one of the many gifts generalized anxiety disorder has given me. So I didn't choose to have that done, and so I think I can figure out the sandwich part on my own, but we're definitely going to see that. So anyway, you've got the four to six half-pound to a third of a pound portions of salmon, some lemon juice. How much? We don't know. 2 tablespoons of butter. Just there, I just grabbed some left over in the refrigerator. Some flour, again, we don't know how much. Water, which I didn't put here because I think that has to do with the parchment paper that we're going to use later. So that it makes sense. You have to dampen the parchment paper, so it makes sense that we wouldn't know how much water is needed for that. And then we've got some, well, it says grated cheddar cheese. We had shredded here at home, so I just used that. Some dill, which, you know, just the, you know, spice store version. Worcestershire sauce, Tabasco sauce. We've got some paprika, salt and pepper, and all the ones I just listed. If I don't list them out, we don't know how much. Some sherry or Madeira. I use sherry because that was what they had at Ingles in the wine section. 1 6-ounce can of tiny shrimp. I did not know that shrimp came canned. This is Bumblebee, and I'm not, as you might be able to tell from production values, I'm not sponsored. So none of these brands were like, oh, I have to use them. They were literally just the cheapest ones at the store. And the Bumblebee was the only brand of tiny shrimp, of canned tiny shrimp at the store. I don't know if it is the only brand that does canned tiny shrimp, but I do know it was the only one at my local Ingles. Some mushrooms that I sauteed. They smelled really good when I was sauteing them. So those are our ingredients. All right, so I have slashed the salmon long ways. That's just kind of how I interpreted how this is supposed to go. And it was pretty okay. I just used a knife, not a serrated one, to do that. So it was pretty easy. So I didn't really feel like it needed like the freezing or anything like that. But again, I also could have misinterpreted how this is supposed to go. So we'll see. So we are going to rub these individual sandwiches with some lemon juice. And so I'm just going to, I'm not really sure about the rubbing part. I'm just going to put some lemon juice on here. So I just kind of squirted it. Oh, that almost hit the book. That would have been bad. So just going to kind of rub what I squirted on there along it. Dry my hands off. And then I'm going to take this, right, and I'm going to put it on some dampened parchment paper. So you can see, done like that on parchment paper. And then you make this filling for the sandwich. So basically what you're doing is you make a lightweight sauce. So you start with a couple of tablespoons of butter, so that 2 tablespoons of butter. And you stir enough flour to thicken it just a bit. And then you're going to add a little water to make a roux. Yay, more French. And it's going to be about the thickness of light cream. Now, someone in this recipe, I don't know if it's Isabel Lewis, from who we get the recipe, or Elinor Donahue, kind of giving her notes. But she says she cheats on this a little to cut starch and calories, or starch calories, and she says you can let it run, it won't matter, but I don't have a, I should have a concern about starch calories, but I don't. So we are adding some grated cheddar cheese to taste, which I've already done the sauce, so this is the sauce, you can see. It's grated cheddar cheese to taste. I do like a lot of cheddar cheese, but I also wasn't sure how I would like it with the salmon, so I just kind of did like a little handful of it. Lots of dill, some Worcestershire sauce, which I think I did like 2 or 3 drops of that. some Tabasco sauce, which again, 2 or 3 drops. I did a lot of paprika, ended up doing, not by choice. It kind of came out faster than I thought it would. Some salt and pepper, and then lemon juice to taste. And she does say perhaps a touch of sherry or Madeira. She lets us know that I never know quantities because everyone likes to season differently. I've never had sherry before. I just did a couple of splashes in there. Since it seems to be an optional part, it does look like if you don't consume alcohol for whatever reason, whether that's religious reasons or personal reasons, it does seem like you could leave this out and probably be okay. So definitely don't feel pressured. I would say to use the alcohol, you know, if that's just not something you do or want to do, or you don't have it on hand, it sounds like you could just leave that right out and there's not going to be any problem there. So took the shrimp from the can and we rinsed it and drained it, and smelled real fishy, smelled like shrimp. So like shrimp pulled right from the ocean. So anyway, we are going to add this to that sauce. I'm going to go ahead and stir it. Do that. That actually looks pretty good. All right, so this is our sauce that we have, right? So I am going to kind of flatten this a little bit in the bowl and then kind of divide it into 4. So I'm being even about how much I'm putting in. Well, I mean, we'll see how that goes, but that's what I'm going to try to do anyway. You'll see what it looks like in a minute. But I'm going to just take this sauce. It feels wrong to call it a sauce now that it has, you know, shrimp and stuff in it. But I'm just going to, it says spoon it in, but it's actually pretty thick. So I did a spoon, but then I'm just kind of, I'm sorry you can't see it, but I'm just kind of using my fingers to get a little bit of it in there. And then do that. So clean off my hands and I'll show you. All right, so that's what I did. You can see that. And so I'm just going to do that 4 more times. Then you put sauteed mushrooms on each one. It didn't say how many again, so I just went ahead and did 2 on each one. And then what you're going to do is you're going to make these into little packets. And moving into kind of the arts and crafts portion of our recipe here, you're just going to make it into a little packet. She tells us to tie off with rubber bands if necessary, and luckily I had some rubber bands. They're handy to have around the house for different things. So let's see here. I'm not sure how tight the bundles need to be, but it just says, you know, so that they're held firmly. So all right, so that's my little bundle. Kind of looks like a little like wrapped candy. So I'm just going to do that 3 more times. All right, so we've got our wrapped bundles here. RIP to the 2 rubber bands that I lost along the way. And I don't know if I mentioned it before. If I did, please forgive me, but it's stressed several times in the recipe. But the parchment paper that you're putting the salmon on needs to be moistened. Like I said, that said several times in it. I used just parchment paper from the store, and I don't know how moist it can get really being parchment paper, which I did make sure it wasn't wax paper. But I did like run it under, you know, water in the sink, and so, you know, fingers crossed. Anyway, you're going to go ahead and bake this at 350 degrees for 40 to 45 minutes. So here we go. All right, so we are done baking. And so I did 40 minutes. It didn't really say kind of what to look for, whether, you know, how you would know like, oh, at 40 minutes it's done or it's not done. You might want to do 45 minutes instead. So I just kind of assumed, just like with any other salmon recipe I've ever done, that it would be like when the salmon flakes with a fork. So I did it that way, and 40 minutes seemed to be really good for that. I set it for 40, the lower part, just because I really hate overcooked salmon. I just, it just drives me insane. So anyway, it occurred to me that I didn't have my salmon in like equal pieces. So some of it's bigger than others, than other pieces. But I'm okay with that. So it's about 8:45 where I am now. So I'm just going to eat one of the smaller pieces. But this is it. You can see the mushroom and the sauce we made. I thought at first I could find a picture of this recipe online, because I just like Googled salmon in Papillote, or however you say it. I've forgotten. But since it literally just means salmon in parchment paper, like there's a lot of ways you could cook salmon in parchment paper. But I do feel pretty good about how this looks. And so I'm going to go ahead and try some. I forgot to pull a knife out. So, all right. I'm going to try to get a part with like the mushroom and the sauce and the salmon. So without like trying to put too much in my mouth at one time. So, okay, here, may not be able to get a mushroom with it, but all right, here we go. Oh, that is a really big piece. Hold on. All right, here we go. Yeah, you know, it's pretty good. It's really rich, but I don't mind that. So if you will remember from past episodes, our rating scale is, would I make this for myself again? And would I make it for someone else? All right, so would I make this for myself again? Yeah, not like every day, mainly just because of the cost of salmon. But yeah, this is definitely something I would make again. For myself, I felt like once I kind of got the hang of it, it wasn't too bad. Would I make this for someone else? Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure, like with the Tabasco sauce, I have some people who can't have that just because of heartburn issues. Now, I actually don't think it's spicy at all with that. But, you know, I just know some people can't have like pepper or things like that. So yeah, I would absolutely make this for myself again. I'd make it for someone else again. So we have another great recipe on our hands. So we're doing pretty well so far. This is the third recipe, if I remember correctly, and we're 3 for 3 here. So awesome. All right, well, I'm going to finish eating this. Like I said, I picked a small piece because it's kind of late at night here, and so I don't want too much right before going to bed. But I will see y'all next time for episode number 5. Bye.